The dust of the trail clung to everything, a fine, red powder that settled on worn skirts and tired eyelids alike. It was the dust of endings, Mary Whitfield thought, as the stagecoach gave one final, groaning lurch and settled into stillness. This was Cedar Ridge. The name promised solidity, trees, a place to put down roots, but all her eyes could see was a wide, unforgiving sky and a single street of sun-bleached wooden buildings that seemed to huddle together for comfort against the vast emptiness of the Texas plains. The air itself was different here. It carried the dry scent of earth and distant rain, a clean sharpness that was entirely foreign after the cloying smoke of the city she had fled. Her body ached from the days of jolting travel, a deep weariness that went beyond bone and muscle and settled in the very core of her spirit. Every movement was an effort. She stepped down onto the hard-packed earth, her boots sending up a little puff of that relentless red dust, and then turned, her arms outstretched. A small, pale hand slipped into hers, and a moment later, her daughter, Lily, stood beside her, eyes wide and solemn. The child's face was too thin, Mary noted with a familiar pang of worry, the shadows under her eyes speaking of too many nights spent in strange, noisy places, of a childhood interrupted by loss and a long, rootless journey. They owned so little now. Their entire world had been condensed into a single, scuffed leather bag that the driver handed down with a grunt. It held a change of clothes for each of them, a small Bible with a cracked leather cover, a tintype photograph that was too painful to look at but impossible to leave behind, and the last few coins of a dwindling hope. This town, this stark and lonely place, had to be the answer to her desperate prayers. It had to be. There was simply nowhere else to go. The stagecoach rumbled away, leaving them standing in a sudden, profound silence broken only by the whisper of the wind. It was a sound that seemed to emphasize their isolation. Mary squared her shoulders, a gesture of habit more than feeling, and tightened her grip on Lily's hand. "Come along, my love," she said, her voice softer than the wind. "Let's find a place to rest." She led Lily toward the largest building on the street, a structure with a faded sign that read General Store and Post Office. The bell above the door jangled, a harsh, cheerful sound that felt out of place. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of pickling spice, coffee, and leather. A man with a kind face and a vast apron looked up from behind a counter piled high with dry goods. "Help you, ma'am?" he asked, his eyes taking in her travel-worn clothes and the quiet child at her side with a practiced gentleness. Mary's voice felt rusty. I was hoping you might know of any work or a room to let. Anything really." She tried to infuse the words with a strength she did not feel. The storekeeper's expression shifted to one of sympathetic regret. "Work's mighty scarce around here, ma'am. As for a room—" He shook his head. "Old Mrs. Gable used to take in boarders, but she passed on last winter. There ain't no inn in Cedar Ridge." The hope that had carried her this far began to leak away, leaving a cold hollow in its place. She could feel Lily pressing closer against her skirts, sensing her mother's despair. The few coins in her bag would not last the night. The sun was already beginning its descent, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples that felt like a cruel mockery of her fear. What would they do? Sleep in the lee of the blacksmith shop? Beg for mercy from the church? Seeing the stark fear on her face, the storekeeper leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. "You might try your luck out at the Cole place. Ethan Cole's ranch is about a mile east of town. He's a quiet sort, keeps to himself, but he's a good man. Hardworking. His place is big, and it's just him. He might have need of some help. A man gets tired of his own cooking, that's for certain." It was a thread, thin and fragile, but it was all she had. Mary thanked him, her voice barely a whisper. Stepping back out onto the wooden sidewalk, the beauty of the twilight seemed to press down on her. The world was so big, so beautiful, and so terribly indifferent. She looked down at Lily, who was staring at a lone hawk circling high above in the darkening sky. She had to be brave. For her. Squeezing her daughter's hand, she picked up their solitary bag. "One more mile, my darling," she said, forcing a calmness into her voice she did not feel. "We have 1 more mile to walk." And turning her back on the tiny cluster of buildings that was Cedar Ridge, Mary Whitfield walked toward the open land, following a dirt track that led east, into the unknown, with nothing but a stranger's name and a final, desperate prayer. The track leading east from Cedar Ridge was little more than a pair of worn ruts carved into the stubborn earth by the passage of wagon wheels and the steady plodding of hooves. It stretched out before them, a pale ribbon unraveling into a sea of grassland that seemed to go on forever, meeting a horizon that was vast and empty. Mary walked with a determined rhythm, one foot in front of the other, the weight of their bag a constant, familiar burden. Lily, small and silent, matched her pace, her small hand a trusting anchor in Mary's own. The grandeur of the landscape was overwhelming, a breathtaking expanse of sky and land that made their two figures seem impossibly small, two specks of dust adrift in the immense, fading light. The sun sank lower, a great fiery or bleeding color across the western sky, setting the few high clouds ablaze in brilliant shades of rose and gold. But for Mary, the beauty was a distant thing, something observed but not felt. Each step was a prayer, a silent plea for shelter, for safety, for a single night without fear. The chill of the coming evening began to seep through her thin shawl, and she felt Lily shiver beside her. Just as a deep dread started to coil in her stomach, the path curved around a gentle rise, and there it was, a ranch, nestled in a shallow valley. It wasn't grand, but it spoke of order and care. A sturdy, low-slung house of weathered timber stood with a quiet dignity, a thin wisp of smoke curling from its stone chimney a promise of warmth. A large barn and several corrals flanked it, and the scent of hay and animals carried on the breeze. In the largest corral, a man was at work. He was tall and broad-shouldered, moving with a quiet, economical grace as he checked the hoof of a calm-looking draft horse. This, she knew with a certainty that tightened her chest, was Ethan Cole. He must have heard their approach on the quiet evening air, for he looked up, his hand still resting on the horse's flank. His face was shaded by the brim of his hat, but Mary could see the strong line of his jaw, the watchful stillness of his posture. He was not old, but his bearing spoke of a man accustomed to solitude and heavy responsibility. He did not smile, but neither did he frown. His expression was one of guarded curiosity at the sight of a woman and child appearing out of the gathering dusk. Swallowing her fear, Mary stopped a respectful distance away. "Mr. Cole." Her voice sounded thin and reedy in the vast quiet. He nodded once, a slow, deliberate motion. "I am." His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. "I am Mary Whitfield. The man at the store in town. He said you might, that is, I was hoping to find work." The words tumbled out, laid bare before this silent, imposing stranger. She could feel Lily hiding behind her skirts, peeking out at the man and the horse. Ethan Cole was silent for a long moment, his gaze taking in every detail, her worn dress, the fear she could not fully hide in her eyes, the way her arm instinctively curved back to protect the child clinging to her. He looked from her face to the darkening sky. "It's no night to be walking back to town," he said finally, his tone pragmatic. "You and the child look like you could use a meal. Come inside." The invitation was not warm, but it was solid. It was an act of basic human decency that felt like a miracle. He led the way to the house, holding the door open for them. Stepping inside was like crossing a threshold into a new world. The main room was warm, lit by a single lamp and a fire crackling in a large stone fireplace. It was simply furnished a sturdy table, a few chairs, a worn rug, but it was clean and solid, a real home. The smell of stewing meat and herbs filled the air, making Mary's stomach clench with a sudden, fierce hunger. He gestured for them to sit at the table and went to the hearth, ladling stew into 2 bowls from the pot hanging over the fire. He placed the food before them with a quiet efficiency, then cut 2 thick slices of bread from a loaf on the sideboard. He did not join them, instead leaning against the counter, his arms crossed, giving them space. The stew was simple but nourishing, the most delicious thing Mary had ever tasted. She ate slowly, trying to maintain some semblance of grace, while beside her, Lily ate with a quiet focus she hadn't shown in weeks. As they ate, Ethan Cole watched. He saw the careful, grateful way the woman ate, the gentle way she encouraged her daughter. He saw the shadows of exhaustion under her eyes, the faint tremble in her hand that spoke of a long-carried fear. He saw the love between them, a tangible thing in the quiet room. When the bowls were empty, he finally spoke, his voice low and serious. The storekeeper was right. I could use help. This place is too much for one man. But a housekeeper, it wouldn't be proper. Not with just us here. Mary's heart, which had begun to lift, sank again. She opened her mouth to plead, but he continued, his gaze direct and unwavering. There is another way. A way that would give you and your girl a home. A real one. For good. He took a slow breath, as if weighing the words himself. I am proposing a partnership. A marriage. In name only, he added quickly, seeing the shock on her face. You would have my name, my protection, a roof over your heads. I would have helped with this place, and well, the quiet gets heavy after a time. He let the offer hang in the air between them, a shocking, desperate, and utterly pragmatic proposal that turned Mary's world completely upside down. The silence in the warm room after Ethan's words was a heavy, living thing, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire in the hearth. Mary felt the world tilt on its axis, the simple, nourishing stew in her stomach turning to a cold, hard weight. A marriage proposal. The words were so utterly foreign, so completely disconnected from the fragile hopes of finding work as a seamstress or a cook, that they seemed to hang in the air, shimmering with impossibility. She stared at the rough-hewn surface of the table, her mind a frantic whirlwind of shock, fear, and a desperate, clawing need for the safety he had just described. A home. For good. The words were a siren's call to a heart that had known only temporary shelter and the constant chill of uncertainty for so long. She could feel the warmth of Lily's small body leaning against her leg, a silent reminder of the tiny, precious life that depended entirely on her next decision. This was not about her own pride or her shattered dreams of a love match. It was about survival in its most basic, elemental form. A roof that did not leak, walls that could keep out the wind, a door with a strong lock, a full larder. These were things she had prayed for on her knees countless nights, and here they were being offered, not as charity, but as a bargain. She risked a glance at the man who had made the offer. Ethan Cole stood by the counter, his posture not one of expectation, but of patience. He had laid his cards on the table, a stark and honest hand, and now he waited, allowing the immensity of the choice to settle upon her shoulders alone. That night, sleep was a distant country. Mary lay in the small, spare room he had offered them, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the old house settling and the mournful cry of a coyote far out on the plains. Lily slept soundly beside her, exhausted from their journey, her breathing deep and even. In the profound darkness, Mary's prayers were silent, fervent whispers from a soul stretched thin. She asked for a sign, for guidance, for the wisdom to see the true path hidden within this shocking proposal. Was this providence, a door opened by a divine hand at the exact moment of her greatest need? Or was it a desperate gamble that would trade one kind of hardship for another, more complex one? The next morning, after a quiet breakfast where little was said, she asked Ethan if he would mind watching Lily for a short while. He agreed with a simple nod, and Mary walked the mile back into Cedar Ridge, the morning sun warm on her back, her mind clearer in the light of day. She found the small white church and its pastor, a man named John, who listened to her story with a kind and solemn patience. He confirmed what the storekeeper had said, that Ethan Cole was a man of his word, known for his honesty and his quiet, steadfast nature. The Lord works in ways we cannot always understand at first, my dear, Pastor John said gently. Sometimes he provides not what we want, but exactly what we need. A foundation of respect is a stronger thing than many might think. Walking back to the ranch, Pastor John's words echoed in her heart, mingling with the memory of Ethan's straightforward manner and the sight of Lily, for the first time in weeks, eating a full meal without fear. The path before her, once so terrifyingly obscure, began to clarify. It was not a path of romance, but one of mutual need and solemn promise. It was a covenant of safety. By the time she saw the ranch house again, her decision was made, a calm certainty settling in her spirit where panic had once reigned. The wedding was a simple, quiet affair 2 days later in the small church. Mary wore her best dress, which was still sadly plain. Ethan stood beside her, tall and serious in a clean shirt. Lily held a small bunch of wildflowers she had picked that morning. They exchanged vows that were promises of loyalty and care, of shared responsibility and mutual respect, rather than passionate devotion. The words were solemn and true, and as Ethan placed a simple gold band on her finger, Mary felt the weight of it not as a chain, but as an anchor. She was now Mary Cole. The wagon ride back to the ranch was silent, the new ring feeling strange and cool on her finger. The house, which had felt like a temporary refuge, now was her home. That evening, the silence within its walls was thick with unspoken thoughts and the profound awkwardness of their new situation. Ethan retreated to his chores, and Mary busied herself with tidying the kitchen, each of them carefully navigating the spaces of the house, as if the other were a piece of fragile furniture that might be upset by a wrong move. They were partners bound by paper and promise, two solitary islands connected by the most fragile of bridges, under a vast Texas sky that watched it all, impartial and silent. The days on the ranch settled into a rhythm as steady and predictable as the rising and setting of the sun, a quiet dance of parallel lives lived under the same roof. Mary rose first, before the dawn had begun to blush the eastern sky, to stir the embers in the hearth and put the coffee on to boil. Ethan was always gone by the time she entered the main room, his bedroll in the smaller side room already neatly made, his presence announced only by the soft closing of the door and the eventual sounds of activity from the barn. They shared meals at the sturdy table, but the conversations were functional, a quiet exchange about the needs of the day, the hen that had stopped laying, the fence line that needed mending, the supplies that were running low. It was a partnership of practicality, a silent agreement fulfilled with a respectful distance that filled the house as palpably as the smell of baking bread. It was Lily who became the unwitting bridge across the quiet divide. The vastness of the land, so intimidating to Mary at first, became a wondrous playground for the child. She began to venture outside, first just to the porch, then to the steps, and finally into the yard, always under the watchful, if distant, eye of her mother from the window. Ethan, for his part, seemed to understand the language of a shy child better than that of a guarded woman. He never approached her directly, but would often be nearby, going about his tasks with a quiet deliberation. He left a small, particularly smooth river stone on the porch step one morning. Another day, it was a perfectly formed, abandoned bird's nest. The true turning point was the old, gentle mare in the corral. Her name was Daisy, and she possessed a bottomless patience. Lily was drawn to her, standing for long minutes at the fence rail, simply watching. One afternoon, Ethan was in the corral, brushing the mare down. He saw Lily watching and, without a word, walked over to the fence. He didn't look at her directly, but spoke softly to the horse. "She's getting on in years," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Doesn't care for the hard work anymore. Seems she'd rather have company." He paused, then held out the brush. "She'd appreciate it if someone saw to her coat. Gets itchy in the heat." It was an invitation, not a command. After a long moment of hesitation, Lily's small hand reached through the rails and took the brush. From that day on, the daily grooming of Daisy became her self-appointed duty, a quiet ritual of trust conducted under Ethan's watchful but unobtrusive gaze. Mary would watch from the kitchen window, her heart doing a strange, aching flip in her chest at the sight of her daughter's serious concentration and the tall, silent man who gave her a wide berth, but never left her completely alone. The icy wall of mere necessity that encased their arrangement began to show its first, faint fractures, letting in a sliver of unexpected warmth. Then came the storm. It built for hours, a great, bruised purple wall of cloud rolling in from the west with a menacing deliberation. The air grew heavy and still, the birds falling silent. Ethan had ridden out hours before to check on the cattle in the far pasture. As the first fat drops of rain began to splatter against the window panes, quickly turning into a relentless, driving downpour, a knot of anxiety tightened in Mary's stomach. The wind began to howl, shaking the shutters. Lightning fractured the sky, followed by booming peals of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. An hour passed, then another. The storm showed no sign of abating, and Ethan had not returned. The image of him alone, exposed on the open range, flashed in her mind. This was no longer about the awkward terms of their marriage. It was about basic human concern. He was her partner, and he was out in this. Grabbing her heaviest shawl and a length of oilcloth, she told Lily to stay put by the fire and ran out into the tempest. The wind tore at her, and the rain soaked through her clothes in an instant. She could barely see, heading toward the barn first, thinking he might have taken shelter there. It was empty. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Trudging through the now muddy yard toward the corrals, she saw a movement near the feed shed. And there he was, soaked to the bone, struggling alone to secure the door against the gale, the horses stamping nervously in their stalls. He looked up, shocked to see her there, her hair plastered to her face, her dress clinging to her. Without a word, she rushed to help, adding her strength to his to heave the heavy door closed against the wind and slide the bolt home. Together, they moved through the roaring chaos, checking latches, calming the frightened animals with soft words, ensuring every living thing on the home place was secure from the storm's fury. It was hard, cold, exhausting work, but they did it side by side, a shared purpose erasing the careful distance they had maintained for weeks. When the last task was done, they stood for a moment in the relative quiet of the barn, breathless and dripping, and in that shared glance of relief and exhaustion, something fundamental shifted. The partnership on paper had been tested by the elements and had held firm. They were no longer just two people sharing a house. They were a team, and the seed of a true and lasting trust was finally, firmly, planted in the muddy ground between them. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and sparkling under a brilliant sun. But for Ethan, a different tempest had taken hold. The deep, racking cough started the next day, a harsh, jarring sound that echoed through the quiet house. The exhaustion from battling the elements had settled deep into his bones, and the chill he had taken rooted itself with a fierce tenacity. By the following evening, he could not rise from the narrow bed in his room. A fever had him in its grip, burning through his sturdy resilience and leaving him shivering and weak, his face pale and beaded with sweat. Mary's response was immediate and instinctive, a surge of purposeful energy that overrode any lingering awkwardness. The man who had offered them shelter, their protector, was now the one in need of protection. She moved a chair into his room, and there she set up her vigil. She prepared a broth from the last of the chicken, rich with herbs, and spoon-fed it to him with a patience she hadn't known she possessed when he was too weak to hold the bowl himself. She kept a cool, damp cloth on his brow, replacing it the moment it grew warm, her touch gentle and sure. She read to him from her small Bible when his rest was fitful, the soft, steady rhythm of the Psalms a calm counterpoint to his fevered murmuring. In his delirium, the walls Ethan so carefully maintained crumbled to dust. He spoke not to her, but to the empty air, his words a raw and painful window into a soul she had only ever seen from a distance. He spoke of the crushing silence of the house before they came, of days that blended into one another with only the livestock for company. He muttered about mistakes made, burdens carried alone, and a loneliness so profound it was a physical ache. "So quiet," he rasped once, his voice a dry leaf rustling. "Just the wind, always the wind." Mary listened, her heart twisting with a sudden, fierce compassion. This strong, silent man was, at his core, as lonely as she had been. The crisis broke on the third night. The fever peaked, and then, as dawn tinted the sky a soft pearl gray, It broke. Mary awoke in her chair to find him sleeping deeply and peacefully for the first time, his breathing even, the terrifying heat gone from his skin. When he finally awoke, clear-eyed and weak but himself again, his gaze found her where she still sat, weary but watchful, in the chair by his bed. The gratitude in his eyes was a tangible thing, warm and deep. "Mary," he said, her name a soft acknowledgement on his lips. "You didn't have to thank you." His recovery was slow but steady. For the first time, their roles were reversed. He was the one confined to the house, and she tended to him, bringing him meals, ensuring he rested. And in that forced stillness, something broke open between them. The careful, practical conversations evaporated. One afternoon, sitting propped up in bed, he began to talk, his voice low and thoughtful. He spoke of his family, who had all gone back east years ago, of his dream to build something lasting from this land, of the weight of doing it all alone. And Mary, sitting in the chair, found herself speaking in return. She spoke of her first husband, not with the sharp grief of fresh loss, but with the softer ache of memory. She spoke of her fears for Lily's future, of the desperate journey that had led them to his door. It was a true conversation, a meeting of two souls who had known hardship and were finally laying down their burdens for the other to see. That evening, for the first time, Ethan did not retreat to his room after supper. He sat with Mary and Lily by the fireplace. He had whittled a small, smooth wooden bird for Lily during the day, and her quiet, delighted smile seemed to light up the whole room. He looked at Mary over the child's head, and in the warm, flickering firelight, she saw something new in his eyes. It was more than gratitude, more than respect. It was a quiet, dawning wonder, a recognition of the family that had, without his even realizing it, grown up around him. The partnership of necessity was quietly, irrevocably, transforming into something far deeper and more enduring, nurtured in the vulnerable silence of sickness and the shared peace of recovery. The slow, steady rhythm of life on the ranch continued, but the air within the walls of the house had changed. It was lighter, warmer, filled with a new and unspoken understanding that flowed between Mary and Ethan like a quiet current. The careful distance was gone, replaced by a comfortable proximity. He would now linger at the table after a meal, listening to Lily recount her small adventures with Daisy the mare. Mary found herself looking for his return from the fields, not with the anxiety of a dependent, but with a simple, pleasant anticipation. They had discovered a shared sense of humor in the antics of a new batch of kittens in the barn, and the sound of their mingled laughter was becoming a familiar music in the house. The town of Cedar Ridge was holding its annual summer picnic, a celebration of the harvest and community. Bundled into the wagon, the three of them made the trip into town, a family unit in the eyes of everyone they passed. The picnic was a lively affair, with long tables laden with food, children running and playing games, and the sound of fiddle music drifting on the warm air. Mary watched families' mothers and fathers working together, sharing smiles over the heads of their children, and felt a strange, bittersweet pang. They looked like that, she realized. To anyone watching, they were Ethan Cole, his wife Mary, and their daughter Lily. The picture was perfect, but it was still just a picture. A likeness without the true heart of the thing. Ethan, too, seemed quieter than usual, observing the easy camaraderie of the other families with a thoughtful intensity. On the wagon ride home, the festive sounds of the town faded behind them, replaced by the deep, resonant silence of the prairie under a blanket of stars. The moon was a bright, slivered sickle, casting a soft, silvery light on the land. Lily, tired from the day's excitement, had fallen asleep in the back, nestled in the hay. The only sounds were the steady clop of the horse's hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels. Ethan guided the horse to a gentle stop. The immensity of the night sky stretched above them, a breathtaking tapestry of countless stars, so clear and close it felt they could almost be touched. The vast silence was not lonely anymore. It was peaceful, a sacred space. He turned to her, his features softened in the moon glow. "Mary," he began, his voice quiet but firm, carrying over the stillness. What started as an arrangement, it hasn't felt that way for a long time now. He paused, gathering his thoughts, his gaze fixed on the horizon. I promised you a home and safety, but I find myself wanting to give you more. I look at you with Lily, and I see my family. This ring, he said, gently touching the hand that wore his wedding band. I want it to mean what it's supposed to mean. He turned to fully face her then, his eyes earnest in the starlight. I have come to care for you. Deeply. Not as a partner in a bargain, but as my wife. I'm asking if we might start again. For real this time. Mary's heart felt too full for words. She had felt the same shift, the same quiet blossoming of something beautiful and unexpected from the dry soil of their practical beginning. The lonely widow and the solitary rancher had found not just shelter in each other, but a second chance at a love neither had dared to hope for. She looked at their joined hands, at the simple gold band that now symbolized not a contract, but a covenant waiting to be fulfilled. She squeezed his hand, her voice a soft but sure whisper in the boundless night. Yes, Ethan. I care for you, too. Let's start again. Under the watchful stars, their marriage truly began, not with a minister's words, but with a quiet promise spoken from one heart to another, sealing the unexpected love that had grown, against all odds, in the heart of the wild Texas plains. The change that settled over the Cole Ranch in the months that followed was as deep and fundamental as the turning of the seasons. The house, once a place of quiet, parallel existence, now hummed with a palpable, joyful energy. The love that had been acknowledged under the vast starlit sky did not remain a whispered secret but bloomed in the daylight, transforming every corner of their lives. Laughter came more easily. Shared glances across the room held a new, warm intimacy, and the gentle touches, a hand on a shoulder, a brush of fingers while passing a dish, were no longer accidental but intentional, a silent language of affection that built a new and sturdy foundation beneath their feet. Ethan's quiet smiles, once so rare, became a common sight, especially when he looked at Mary, his eyes holding a softness that spoke of a happiness long yearned for and finally found. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and violet, Mary placed her hand over his. There was a new, profound peace in her heart, a certainty that had replaced the constant fear of her earlier days. Ethan, she said, her voice soft but clear, there is something I need to tell you. She turned to him, her eyes shining with a joy so profound it threatened to spill over. Our family is going to grow. A new life is coming. The words hung in the warm air, a sacred announcement. For a moment, Ethan was utterly still, the meaning washing over him. Then, a look of pure, unguarded wonder spread across his face, a joy so deep it seemed to radiate from him. He pulled her into a careful, fierce embrace, his voice thick with emotion as he whispered his happiness against her hair. The promise of a child, a baby born from their love, and not just their pact, was the final, beautiful seal on their union. The waiting months were a time of sweet anticipation and preparation. Ethan fussed over Mary, his protective instincts in full bloom, while Lily was fascinated by the changes in her mother, her small hand often coming to rest on Mary's growing belly with a sense of awe. The ranch thrived under their shared care, each day a testament to the life they were building together, a partnership now complete in every sense of the word. The past, with all its pain and loneliness, receded into a distant memory, a storm that had finally passed and left behind a world washed clean and new, full of hope and the promise of tomorrow. The story of their family found its perfect completion on a cool, clear morning as the first light of dawn touched the windows of the ranch house. Inside, surrounded by love and warmth, Mary brought a new life into the world, a healthy son with a strong cry that announced his arrival with vigor. Later, as the morning sun streamed into their bedroom, Ethan sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his calloused finger gently stroking the baby's tiny hand. Mary, tired but radiant, looked on. Lily stood beside her brother, her face a picture of solemn wonder. In that quiet, sun-drenched room, they were a complete circle. Ethan looked from his newborn son to his daughter, and finally to his wife, his heart too full for words. They had journeyed from a desperate proposal to a true and lasting love, through hardship and healing, to arrive at this moment of perfect, peaceful joy. They had not just found a home. They had built one, with faith, resilience, and unexpected love. Their forever after was no longer a dream. It was the warm, solid reality of the family held close within those walls, a love story written not in words, but in the quiet, enduring rhythm of their shared life on the land. If you've journeyed with Mary, Ethan, and Lily from a desperate proposal to a true and lasting love, then you understand the power of a second chance. Their story of faith, resilience, and unexpected love is complete, but countless other tales await, stories of hearts mending and hope blooming in the most unexpected places. To discover more emotional journeys and timeless romances that warm the spirit, subscribe for future stories. A new chapter of adventure and heart is always just around the corner.